Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I am so delighted and excited to be here with this amazing panel, who I'll introduce each person very briefly. David Kleinberg started his amazing business, David Kleinberg Design Associates, in 1997 after working with the amazing legend Albert Hadley for many years. David's office is here in New York, but David has projects all over the world. He's been featured in every single Shelter magazine. His own monograph, Traditional Now, is also out to show his glorious design. And one of the things that David has said, which I really love, that really talks about his work is, to quote, "If I had to describe my rooms and compare them to people, they wouldn't be the loudest or the ones you might first see when you're entering a cocktail party, but they'd hopefully be the ones with whom you'd want to spend the most time." And indeed, that's true, and also you'd want to spend the most time with David. Julianne Moore is nothing less than one of our national treasures. Julianne she's won every award you can think of: Academy Award, a British Academy Film Award, 2 Golden Globes, 2 Emmy Awards, and Time has named her one of the 100 most influential people in the world, and the New York Times has said that Julianne is one of the greatest actors of the 21st century. Her most recent film, Pedro Almodovar's The Room Next Door with Tilda Swinton, is only, I read this today, is only going to be in theaters December 20th, so just put that on your calendar, because I am. And then it goes nationwide in January. What you may not know about Julianne is that Julianne's a passionate collector. She has designed the most beautiful homes, and she's a design lover, of course. Evan Lobel, his book, Alchemy, The Art of Philip and Kelvin LaVerne, was 10 years in the making, and it is what has brought us all here together. Evan opened his gallery, Lobel Modern, in 1998 in New York City and started buying pieces by the father and son design teams, whose functional sculpture and art is done in a variety of extraordinary mediums. In 2014, Kelvin asked Evan to collaborate on a book about his father's work. 10 years later, the book is here for us to celebrate. It's extraordinary. In Evan's book, Kelvin is quoted as saying of his father, much like Leonardo da Vinci, he had a penchant for engineering. "I never saw a problem he couldn't solve." So we will dive right in first with Evan. Tell us a little bit about do you remember what pieces you saw and what struck you about those pieces that kind of looked different from anything else you were collecting?
Well, first off, thank you everybody for coming, and thank you to this amazing group up here. This panel is just unbelievably great. I'm very honored to be with them. I opened my gallery in 1998, as Wendy said, and I started carrying Philip and Kelvin LaVerne almost immediately because I was just drawn to their work. It's very captivating, it's very interesting. Everybody loved it that came into my gallery, but inevitably people would ask, "How did they make this?" And I would say, "I'm not sure." And they would say, "This abstract pattern, this circular abstract pattern, what does it mean?" And I would say, "I wish I knew." And for me, when David was one of the first interior designers to come into my gallery in 1998, and I'll never forget, he told me, "If you want to survive and be good in this business, you have to be really smart. You have to research. You have to be like the smartest guy in the room." And I took those words to heart. I've always been a researcher, and I wanted to learn. I wanted to be able to respond to all those questions that people would always ask me. So in 2012, I was asked to do it's an annual guest lecture at the Houston Museum of Fine Arts, and I chose to do it on Philip and Kelvin LaVerne. Not because I knew so much about them, because I was still pretty, I don't want to say ignorant, but I wasn't knowledgeable about their works. But I thought that would force me to do a deep dive and get in touch with Kelvin and collaborate with him. Kelvin is very reclusive. He doesn't really have a lot of relationships with dealers and collectors, he's a true artist. He kind of likes to be left alone and likes his work to speak for itself. And when Kelvin and I worked on that lecture in 2013 or 2012, we kind of hit it off. I ask a lot of questions, annoyingly so, and I'm very persistent. And I think Kelvin appreciated that, and I would take a lot of notes, and I wrote a lecture, and then I came back to him, and Kelvin is like the ultimate perfectionist. Nothing is good enough until it's perfect. And so he made a lot of corrections, and I rewrote it and did a slideshow, and I came back, and he made 50 more corrections, and then finally, it was good to go. And before I left, Kelvin said, I want to give you these two photos of these two works that no one's ever seen because I want you to have something really special for the lecture. And I said to him, well, how many other photos of unique works do you have? And he said, most of our works were one or two of a kind. And I said, well, that's the problem. Nobody knows your work. I mean, you're known for a few specific models that maybe you did 10, 20, or 30 of, but all the other models are absolutely mysterious because no one's ever seen them. And in fact, I was finding small tables, cast pieces and welded pieces in those early years. And when I first looked at them, I did not know who did them. I loved them, but I thought, who did this? And then when I would inspect it more closely, I'd see Philip and Kelvin LaVerne signed, engraved into the metal, and I think, wow, these guys did a lot of different kinds of things. So in 2014, when Kelvin approached me to do his book, I told him that we would really have to cover the whole breadth of his work, and that we would have to spend a lot of time doing a deep dive into the methods of production and the inspirations and all that. So, I mean, I guess to answer your question is that I found the work originally very, very enigmatic. I would look at it, and it was, I loved it, but for me, it asked more questions than it answered. And their work, so much of it, if you actually read the book, so much of their work has hidden meanings. Deep thought went into the pattern, or the shape, or the way it was made, or, nothing was accidental. They were extremely intellectual. They loved art, dance, ballet, other artists, art movements, classical music. And they designed various pieces around all those passions, but unless you really know the stories behind the pieces, you probably wouldn't know that. And for me, it was really important to put that in writing.
I want to go back to something after I ask our other panelists about that very thing. David, how do you work with a client who wants to build a collection? I assume that many of your clients, or all of them, already have quite extraordinary collections. But do they rely on you to go to Evan's gallery and say, show us what's new, show us what we should be knowing about?
I mean, it's nice to think that they all have extraordinary collections when they come to me, but it's way more profitable that they don't, frankly. And part of my job, Albert Hadley had a bulletin board of things behind his desk, and on one little 3x5 card, it was a quote from Diana Vreeland that said, give them what they never knew they wanted. And in part, I think part of my job as a designer is not only to listen to what people want, but to hear thoughts that they haven't expressed. And so part of my job is to sort of show people and introduce people to things that I think will resonate with them. And so, I think I hopefully have had more time to look at things and experience things and talk to dealers and go to travel and, to shop. And so I can bring them back things, kind of the great hunter-gatherer, because that's basically all decorators are. I can't shop for anything else, but don't send me to a supermarket. But I can shop for furniture, and I'm better at that than fabric, frankly. So, my job is to go see things, so it's probably true. I was probably one of the first to go to Evan's shop, mostly because I'm old and I was around in those days, but also because here was a young person in a business that was not particularly known for young people, and I was interested in what he was showing, And of course, I grew up on Long Island, and he was showing the work of Carl Springer, and he was showing the work of Kelvin and Philip LaVerne. Now, where I grew up, any house that was well decorated had Carl Springer furniture in it and had some pieces by LaVerne. So I was familiar with them, but I hadn't really seen anyone showing them. I knew the gallery on 46 East 57th Street. You could walk in the door and buy their furniture. And so it was really sort of enlightening to see somebody who was showing it. And of course, for me, they were artists. I'm sort of a journeyman. And so what I'm interested in is finding things that will go into a mix and create a kind of result that's harmonious and pleasant. And not all pieces are team players. And the interesting thing I think about the LaVerne pieces is, while some of them are very specific, the historical series is very specific, the Asian pieces are very specific, some of them are absolute gems of how they work with, I put their furniture in with 18th century French furniture, I put it in with very modern furniture. So for me, it's a great mixer. It's a great, as I say, not all furniture plays nicely. Right. And so it's a very easy way for me to introduce that into the mix.
That's so interesting. Julianne, you are so astute about design, and you really, looking at the photographs of your beautiful homes, you know exactly what you want, how you want things. When did you start to really dig deep into design and kind of get the bug?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. That's quite a compliment, and I'm thrilled to be in this wonderful company with these talented people. I think, I'm so excited to talk about this because what's so important, what we've really been talking about is curation and point of view. And in my business, I'm always looking for point of view. I'm like, who's telling the story? Where is the narrative going? Like, what is the point of view? And for me, as I started, my mother was a person who loved design and also loved craft. She was always making things, sewing things, refinishing things, making curtains and slip covers, and we didn't have a lot of money, so she did everything she could to kind of create an environment. But she was always telling me what was beautiful, where to look. Look at that. Look at this house. Let's go here. Let's go to this historic home. What does this look like to you? It's just look, look, look. And so when I came to New York City and I walked by Evan's gallery with my baby in a stroller and said, hey, what's going on? I would say, tell me about that. And Evan would share his expertise with me. And there were so many places I went to in New York City where I'd say, what about this? Tell me about this. Why is this important? Why is this beautiful? Why do you hate this? Why do you think this is junk? That kind of stuff. And I had such an education. And it was so exciting because I was learning all the time from people who had a very specific point of view. I was learning from these curators. So you come to an event like this and you walk around and you see all these different booths and you see all these different kind of taste points and it's so interesting to see because it's so personal and so human. And I think sometimes in design, we forget that it is really about humanity. With LaVerne, it's so intensely personal, right? They're actually physically making something with their hands and applying their own narratives to it, and then it's in conversation with other pieces in a house, and so you're seeing all of these human beings through the things that they've made in conversation with each other.
Well, that's so interesting because this fair, of course, gives all of us the opportunity to learn from each dealer, each gallerist, and they love us to ask questions. Sometimes I'm a little intimidated and I think, oh, it's so fancy and I'm not fancy enough. But they love talking about their work and they love talking about why they collected so-and-so and where it came from, so don't miss the opportunity to do that. One thing that I realized in my knowing the work, I thought a lot of it was historical. I thought these were antique pieces that had been collected and maybe embellished, but I realized from the book that they were great historians. They loved history and they loved to celebrate like the Chinese culture and the Egyptian culture and then going and learning about the different techniques with materials. Can you talk a little bit about that and how they did that?
Sure. I think that's one of the most interesting parts of this story is that, you know, Philip was someone who liked to experiment. He was the father. And he would try different things, concepts, castings, engraving, and they were both history buffs. Philip loved Asian history. So the Asian tables that you see are usually, you know, Philip's design. Kelvin loved Europe. He studied European history, European art. So you'll see a table, there's a table called the Odyssey table, and actually that started off because in 1965, Jackie Onassis went to their gallery and said that she wanted to commission a dining table for Ari's yacht based on ancient Greece. So Kelvin decided to take, in 1966, he decided to spend a few months in Europe, and he went to Greece to sketch the ruins of the Erechtheion and the Parthenon. And then he went to Italy, and he went to the Sistine Chapel and some other places and did a lot of drawing and sketching. And the sketches that he made in Greece were the foundation for the Odyssey motif, which they did create a dining table that wound up on the Onassis yacht. But you know, they also did a coffee table version of it and a cabinet version of it. They never thought of their pieces as furniture, ironically.
Yeah, it was more working art.
Yeah, they called it functional sculptures. You know, I would have hundreds of conversations with Kelvin, and he would often correct me. It's not a table; it's a functional sculpture. I'd say, okay, like I get that. I totally get that. But they were both fascinated with history, and they had seen like ancient Etruscan mirrors where there had been engravings, beautiful figural engravings on the frames. And they decided that they wanted to figure out how to engrave metals on a much bigger scale. And that was kind of the inspiration for their metalwork. They figured out how to bond bronze and pewter, and they were both like chemists. I mean, they experimented and experimented and experimented, and they figured out how to bond large sheets of bronze and pewter, and then how to hand engrave very intricate patterns and scenes into it. And then, you know, they wanted to incorporate historical motifs into very modern furniture. So if you look at the furniture designs themselves, the tables or the cabinets, they're extremely modern, but they wanted to mix that with the sense of history. So they combine them. Probably the most, well, the engraving was very difficult, but probably the most interesting part of it is the fact that they experimented for 6 years with different types of bronzes, different chemical mixtures of bronzes with other metals, because they brought in soils from all around the world, because they wanted to use organic methods to do accelerated aging of the metal. So they had a loft on East 28th Street, and they had enormous vats of soil. And after they would engrave the panels, they would bury them underground for months. And they kept books with what day this one went in, what day that one went in, and then it would get unearthed, cleaned off, and then each one would get hand-painted. So Kelvin kept a little studio above the workshop where he would sleep. But he was a workaholic, and he loved his work. He would often talk about the myth of Pygmalion, which is a Greek myth about a sculptor who sculpts the perfect woman out of alabaster and then prays to Aphrodite to turn her into a real woman. And Aphrodite answers his prayers, and she becomes a real woman, and they're madly in love. And he would say, that's the story of someone who falls in love with their work. And he said, Pygmalion's my story.
Tell the Me Too story.
Oh,
it's a good one.
Yeah. So,
This is a good one.
So, you know, in the 1970s, again, like they were having a lot of success with their engraved tables. As soon as the Philip LaVerne Gallery opened in 1960, most major New York newspapers covered it. You know, people saw the work, and it was very unique, and like I said, highly enigmatic. People just thought it was amazing. A lot of designers loved it, collectors. But by the early 70s, they were true artists. They had both studied art, gone to the Art Student League, mentored under famous sculptors, and they didn't consider themselves decorative artists. They considered themselves like true artists, sculptors, and they could also paint and draw. So in the early 1970s, they started doing castings, and small castings are not that hard, but when you get to bigger castings, they use the lost wax method, which is centuries old. It's very hard to do large castings without air bubbles and other issues with them. So they brought in a mold maker from Milan to help them, who stayed for a few years. And Kelvin said they only did the cast pieces for a few years because they really weren't it wasn't financially viable. They might have to cast something 10 times to get it perfect. So the cast pieces are very special. They often had female models who would pose for them. They loved the human body. They loved the female form in particular. And there was one model who came to pose for them, for a coffee table base, and she was very agitated. He said normally she was always in a great mood and very sweet, and she had a beautiful body, and they would always sculpt her, and on this one day, they could tell she was very upset. So Kelvin asked her, what's wrong? She said, well, I earlier in the day, I had been on a different job modeling for a different artist, and I was standing near him, getting ready to pose, and he came very close to me, and he touched me on my hip, and it made me very uncomfortable. And Kelvin actually, he said to her, if you want to leave, you can. She said, no, I'm okay. I'll be fine. Kelvin said he could feel the energy permeating from her of disquiet. So he sculpted her, and then he and his father decided, instead of her hand coming up, her hand was going to hold the table in the artwork, but instead her hand is kind of cut. And then you see a hand on her hip, and if you look closely, it's a man's hand. And that's the thing about all of their work, is that there's all this subtlety to it. There's all these stories. They were oftentimes trying to capture emotions. It wasn't just let's make something pretty. They were super intellectual. And in 1973, when they made that table, they named it Me Too. It's just completely coincidental. It's very weird, but yeah.
And once again, so much about point of view. That's what's so exciting to me about their work. I think when you look at it again and again, there's always a narrative. There's always a point of view. The interest in European history and Asian history, in classicism, in physical bodies, all of that. It's very, and I love the narratives.
Well, speaking of narrative, what you said, Julianne, about character. Well, first of all, finding the narrative for the character. For me, when I scout constantly, I go into people's most private spaces, their homes, great honor, great privilege. And the thing about a home that resonates, and I think, David, you can speak to this, is it tells a story about the person who lives there. It's not just a bunch of stuff that's decorated. It's actually things that resonate for that person and for their life.
Yeah, well, ideally, that's what it's supposed to be. It's arguable if that's still how people are approaching it, but that's a different conversation. But, and I've said for years, and I've been quoted saying this, that when I finish a project, I'm standing on the other side of the front door. It's not my house. Right. My house looks the way it does because I live in it. And so I am trying to interpret, to some degree, the way I think people want to live or imagine the way they want to live, because it's the same thing. I shouldn't say this, but it's like exit polls. Are you really getting a real answer from people? When you ask people, do you entertain? Everyone says yes. When you ask people if they watch television, everyone says no. But I know that's not the truth. And so, it's how to make it. But then, it's also, I sort of think, will somebody respond to a piece of furniture? Will they, will this mean something to them? Will they won't mean something to it? Will they be receptive to it? I mean, what Evan was saying about the LaVernes, you know, I think what resonated about their work for me always was it was always steeped in history, and it was always steeped in precedent. And that's always been really important in how I've always approached design. It's always, okay, where did this start? How has it influenced what I'm doing? And where's it going? And if you know, looking, I literally spent the last 2 days reading Evan's book, and there's a lot of information, which many books don't have. This is so well researched, it's unbelievable. And you know, it's kind of a rabbit hole, but it's a rabbit hole you're happy to go down. But looking at the work, it reminds me, I was always more drawn to the more abstract pieces, you know, Eternal Forest and Fantasia, you know, these repeating patterns, those are the ones that always resonated with me. But when you go back and you look at the book and you think about, you know, sort of artist makers now and how they've been influenced, you know, people like Ingrid Donat, Wendell Castle, all these people who are making kind of functional art. And more now, I mean, in the last 10 years, there's been an enormous amount of young makers who make beautiful kind of, you're kind of not sure, are they making furniture, are they making art? And here are these guys who were in the 60s who were doing something that really wasn't the norm, you know, and they weren't making reproductions of country French furniture, which they probably could have sold by the truckload. And so it's so interesting how it's affected. You know, you look at some of their work that has all these interesting biomorphic shapes and go back through the show and you think, oh, that probably wouldn't exist. That probably wouldn't exist, you know.
So true. Well, I think also what's interesting is some of their work reminds me of Giacometti. Some of their work reminds me of, you know, Moore. I mean, there's a whole range of things that they've done. And were you feeling that as artists, some artists say, oh, I don't care if my work doesn't sell, I just am doing it for the art? Did you get a sense that they didn't care? I mean, they were so committed and so into the work that, well, if this doesn't sell, and also it was one-off. So wait a minute, that's a good question. So did they create a piece from a commission, or did they just create a piece?
I mean, mostly they were just creating. But you know, one of the reasons why I'm not the most patient person in the world. You know, when I told Kelvin I would do this catalog with him, I thought it would take 2 or 3 years, and not 11. And you know, with Kelvin, he is as slow can be, and he would always tell me, stop rushing. You know what? The thing about their work is, as I started doing a deep dive into it, and Kelvin had a bunch of photos, and I did a lot of research and came up with other pieces. I would find a piece, and Kelvin would say, "Oh yeah, this is a piece we made." You know, most of it wasn't commission, but you know, he'd say we made this in the late '60s, and I'd say it's fantastic, and he'd say, "Yeah, it's a masterpiece." I mean, they knew. And then I'd say, "Well, how many of them did you make?" And he'd say, "Oh, 1." And I'd say, "Why 1?" And he said, "Well, it's a masterpiece. Why would you want to make more?" and I said to him, "But aren't you afraid that you made one of them and it went into someone's collection and no one's ever going to see it?" And he said, "That's a problem." He said that one of the reasons why I really want to make sure this book gets done is because people think of us as decorative artists because of the Chinese tables. Right. And he said that was 1% of our work. The other 99% of our work were abstract sculptures and bronze castings, and they did incredible engraved paintings and pierced paintings, and they did all this groundbreaking material that no one knows about. So for me, I committed to it. You know, I stuck with it, even though at times like I really was going crazy that it was taking so long. Kelvin would email me, "Stop getting so upset. Gone with the Wind took 10 years," you know. And you know.
Big consolation. But the thing is, David and Julianne, you are working on another project, domestic-wise, and Do you feel, is it a chance to reinvent your surroundings? Well, of course, because the place is different, but do you think, oh, this is an opportunity to live in a different way than I was living previously?
I think that, I mean, the thing about design, and probably everybody here agrees, the more you learn, the more you want to learn. And the more you develop your eye, the further your eye goes. So things that satisfied you initially are not going to satisfy you as you go through your life. So every time I encounter a new project, a new house, every time I move, I'm like, oh, okay, you know, what am I, where am I going to go now? And also, what does the space demand, and what pieces are going to be in conversation with each other? I love what you said about it not, some things mix well and some things don't, and you don't know until you're in the space and you put things together. Like I always say, a great dealer will say to you, you can try it, just bring it home, look at it, see if it works with what you have, you know. So yeah, and I was actually thinking even about bronze and metal. I'm very interested in that because I think that it can be really cooling in a room. That when if you have a lot of wood furniture, or just depending on the tone in the room, you can bring in a metal piece, and it sort of just brings the temperature down a little bit, and it readdresses your eye, shakes up your eye. Yes. You know, so yeah, I'm always looking for that. I'm always trying to figure out. And of course, the horrible thing is too, every place is specific, and you can't just move all that stuff.
No,
it just doesn't work that way. Yeah.
Well, I know that I could talk with you forever, but I know that we have a time constraint, and I'd love to open it to the floor if anyone has any questions to be able to ask them.
Thank you so much for such a fascinating talk. So my question is, for young designer like me, what are your advice and recommendation when it comes to curate Philip and Kelvin, pieces? What are the things we should consider in the process of curation? Thank you.
I mean, obviously, I think Julianne is right. The first thing you need to do is you have to keep looking. You just have to expose yourself. If you're interested in anything, a particular furniture or nothing, just keep looking. I'm a big proponent of go look, go look. I say to all the young people in my office, your experience on the internet and in front of a computer is not the same experience. So as much as you can travel, as much as you can get in front of something, as much as you can open the door of a piece of furniture, see how it's made, understand it. I mean, the work of the LaVernes, the patina is so extraordinary and has such a variation. And because they were chemists, and Evan named the book Alchemy, it's all about what they could do with these metals. So I think that's the most important thing. And to Julianne's point, when you were asking her, is this a way to reinvent or think of a new way? I had a conversation just yesterday with somebody, and they said, oh, well, my tastes have changed. And I said, your tastes haven't changed. They're just evolved. Yeah. And it's a very different kind of thing, because taste changing is like, okay, I want to wear, sneakers today and high heels tomorrow. Well, I'm not so good in high heels, but I'm not so bad in high heels. But but it's the evolution, and so as a young designer, you're going to look back on what you were interested in today, and I look back on what I did. And some of it, I think, I'm impressed by, to be perfectly honest, and others just shame-making. But it is that evolution that you need to really be open to. And as much as you can, talk to the people who are selling the things. They know more than you do.
Thanks so much. So fascinating to hear, especially the soil is like. Hi, Julianne Moore. I just, Evan, you had mentioned Jackie commissioned something for the Onassis' yacht. Does anybody know where that piece is today?
No, no. I mean, I've tried to search high and low for it.
Yeah.
But you know, I don't know how many years it was on that yacht. But the truth is that, you know, bronze on salt water probably
good.
is not the best combination. You know, I don't know what happened to it, but probably nothing good.
Thank you.
That's chemistry.
Well, if there are no more questions, I just thank you all so much for being with us and enjoy the show.
Everybody.
There's a book signing also before you enjoy the show.
Yeah. Yeah, come to the book signing in front of booth A4. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.